So, as of late, I've had a sudden fascination to learn about the Scottish War of Independence. I don't know what sparked my interest, but I just seem to have it, and I noticed that Historymarche has a entire series about at least the first one, and I kind of really want to watch it. I don't know why, but I have this desire to just learn about this event. And I know there is a famous movie called Braveheart. I haven't seen Braveheart, but I've watched a video from this YouTuber called History Buffs. He kind of reviews historical films and then kind of judges them how accurate they are. And yeah, his Mel Gibson, whenever he touches Mel Gibson movies, he kind of points out that they're incredibly inaccurate and incredibly just um yeah, not good sources for historians at all. They're kind of right up there with Ridley Scott in a sense that you can't trust him. But still a very famous movie that I'm thinking about maybe watching for the channel. But either way, I really don't know much about the event. I know about the legend of William Wallace, though. I've heard that a lot of a lot of the discourse surrounding him kind of has been, for lack of a better word, mythologized. He's kind of there's fictional elements thrown into the real man's story, if that makes sense. So it's a bit hard to take everything written about him at face value. I believe the English king was what, Edward Longshanks, Longshanks. I'm probably getting this name super wrong, but I've heard he was a pretty brutal person. But again, like I said, those are kind of like the names I'm familiar with, but I don't really know much about the events or what everything these guys did. And I'm going to by the end of this. So I'm really looking forward to this. I've been really excited and very pumped to get into it. And before I do, I just want to say, if you want to watch the original video by History March, the link is down in the description down below. And if you enjoy my channel and you want to help me out in any way, shape, or form, feel free to please like, comment, subscribe, and maybe consider becoming a member for $1 a month. It would really help me out a lot. Now, with that said, and now without any further ado, let's do. I got started.
Alexander III, King of Scots, is dead. Unfortunately, his death has left the ancient Canmore line hanging by a fragile thread. Alexander, in addition to losing his wife in 1275, lost all his children in the 1280s, before tragically dying himself en route to visiting his new young wife, Yolande of Drew, at Kinghorn, in hopes of siring a new heir. The continuance of the Canmore line now hinged on a small girl, the only daughter of Alexander's daughter Margaret. Margaret had married the King of Norway in 1281, and it was now this 3-year-old girl who claimed the throne of Scotland. Initially, this state of affairs suited Edward Longshanks, the powerful King of England.
Longshanks. I said, what did I say? Long sharks? Yeah, yeah. Oh boy. Well, the point is Longshanks. Because he shanks people. And, okay, so this is already an awful situation off the bat for Scotland, by the way. Literally the last line for, I guess, the royal family is literally a 3-year-old girl. That's already bad enough when a literal 3-year-old is now running the nation. Oh boy, yeah, I could see. I could see how, England would want to take advantage of this, because we've seen this a lot in history. When a child king or monarch takes the throne, that's usually where people start plotting and scheming and invading, because it's the most opportune time. Like, wow, a literal 3-year-old, they can't handle this, so Oh boy, that's bad. Wait, it's gonna mean like a marriage? Henry Alexander. Oh wait.
Margaret would wed Edward's own heir and namesake. The match was even formalised at a summit attended by the Scottish Guardians, as well as Edward, his advisors, and representatives from the Norwegian court on November 6, 1289.
So is Edward trying to unite the groups through marriage? Again, like, I don't know much about Edward. I've heard things about him, like he was a very brutal person, very brutal. That's about what I've heard, and a little bit of what I've seen. Like I said, I haven't watched the Braveheart movie. I only really know about it because of that one video I saw from history buffs. So that's not the same as actually sitting down and watching the movie. But okay, so is he trying? I'm assuming that he maybe wants to unite England and expand his realm and get Scotland under the banner, as it were. So if he's trying to do it through marriage, that is pretty smart.
The agreement was premised on the assurance that the Scottish realm would remain free in itself, but if Longshanks ultimately hoped for an eventual unification of the realms in the person of his son's heir with the Maid, then this hope was dashed with the demise of young Margaret herself en route to Scotland in September of 1290.
Oh wow, that sucks. So literally, like, the last of that family is just gone now. She was literally like the last hope for it, and oh dude, that sucks so hard.
Edward, however, remained entrenched in the process of selecting a suitable king from the various claimants. Ultimately, Edward achieved what he wanted from the whole affair, requiring all prospective candidates to swear homage to him as caretaker of the realm. In turn, Edward chose John Balliol as king over the other main contender, Robert Bruce.
I've also heard of Robert the Bruce. I always could have sworn that they used the title the Bruce, like they had the before it, but either way. Alright, so yeah, that's pretty already. Scotland's in quite a little bit of a predicament there, eh? Like, the last of that original family basically hinged on a 3-year-old. Now she died, and yeah, I guess England and Edward wanting to expand and get the Scots under his banner, as it were, is basically now kind of playing kingmaker, showing the dominance already, right? And taking advantage of the situation at Scotland, so that sets up quite. Yeah, that sets up Edward already as kind of the guy running the show in practice by just this alone.
John Balliol was enthroned at Scone Abbey on 30th of November 1292, the feast of St. Andrew, Scotland's patron saint and protector. King Edward himself pointedly did not attend the ceremony. As arbiter and kingmaker, Edward by demonstration was John's feudal overlord. In short, the King of Scots attended the coronation of English monarchs, but not vice versa. Most importantly for Edward, Balliol had unambiguously sworn fealty to him before leaving for Scone, and at Newcastle on December 26, 1292, the new King of Scots knelt before the King of England as his sworn man.
I love how they have Edward with these glowing red demonic eyes, as if okay, like I'm like wondering if what I've heard about him is true and he's about to go ham and like commit so much murder. Like, I'm kind of wondering, but yeah, this is already showing that this relationship, Edward's already treating Scotland like his own personal vassal, right? The relationship ain't of equals.
Longshanks unashamedly proceeded as he had begun, and took every opportunity to humiliate and demonstrate his superior lordship over both the new king and his subjects, reversing legal rulings of the Guardians made during the interregnum, and even summoning King John himself in October of 1293 to appear before the English Parliament to answer the appeal of a Scottish lord. Such humiliations were too much, even for the meek John Balliol, and specifically his leading lords. Indeed, his weakness as king could also be bent to the will of others, other than Longshanks. Ironically, Edward himself, as Duke of Gascony, had been summoned by his own feudal lord, King Philip of France, to answer for English attacks on French seamen. Following his refusal, Philip pounced, seizing Edward's lands in May of 1294. Further trouble erupted in Wales in September.
Okay, so quite a lot going on here. Typical France versus English behavior. Okay, yeah. So Edward is a very dominant personality. He ain't answering to anybody. Is the vibe I'm getting, and he expects homage. And um, I'll say definitely very interesting. Though you think he would want to integrate the Scots a bit more um friendlier. He's very aggressive, like already, like kind of asserting his dominance, but again, the word humiliating the king of the Scots, John, and kind of showing that the Scots that they're kind of being treated as already basically vassals. So I could see how the hostilities are about to erupt. Edward definitely wasn't easing into this, in a very diplomatic, cordial way. Very much like, okay, you're basically my B word now. So yeah.
Edward had crushed this revolt by May of 1295, but soon discovered that opposition was brewing in Scotland too. By this time, the Scots had elected a council to govern in Balliol's name.
The Council of 12 was formed in July, compromise. Okay.
And made common cause with Edward's enemy by concluding an alliance with France in October of the same year. Unfortunately for the defiant Scots, King Edward focused his wrath on them, ordering a general muster at Newcastle to assemble by the 1st of March, 1296.
Okay, so very smart move by the Scots, kind of like this could kind of be a two-front issue. Like Edward has to worry up north of the Scots, and then down below by the French. So definitely this could create an opportunity of having to focus on two fronts, depending on how much the French actually are committing at the moment. But a very smart move actually to create multiple enemies for Edward to deal with.
The Scots Council issued its own call to arms, ordering all free men to assemble at Cadonlee, just north of Selkirk. Edward advanced on Wark, occupying the castle on the River Tweed, before halting during the Holy Week. In late March, however, the Scots poured over the border into England, ravaging villages on their approach to Carlisle. The Scots, however, were repelled by the defenders led by the Bruce, the Lord of Annandale, and the Earl of Carrick.
Sorry to interrupt, but this is important.
Oh my
The
gosh.
shooter who murdered my sweet little Daniel.
Failing to take Carlisle, the Earl of Buchan turned his forces to cutting a path of destruction through Northumberland, burning villages and churches, though this failed to draw the wrath of Edward away from his eastern march into Scottish lands. Edward's anger was directed towards the lucrative town of Berwick on the Tweed. The attack had begun from the sea, but the 4 leading ships ran aground and were set upon by the furious Scots, the crews cut to pieces, and their vessels fired. This initial success inflamed the confidence of the defenders to the degree of defying Edward in person when he arrived. Berwick had been one of the settlements demanded by Longshanks the previous year, and repeating...
Oh boy. Kiss my butt, Longshanks. That kind of reminds me of some random event where there was this siege. I forgot. It must have taken, I think, in the Italian peninsula. But essentially, this town was besieged, and then some woman, stood on top of the walls, and it's like, something of the vein like, yeah, you can take my kids. I have the instrument to make more, and something like kind of like pointing at her genitals, something like that. So that kind of reminds me of that. Just taunting the um. Oh boy. I don't know, bro. Longshanks is, if what I've heard about him is true, I don't think he's the kind of guy you want to mock, even if you are now emboldened, but we'll see.
His order in person was met with the jeers of his enemies, with an English source even writing that one particular brazen defender bared his behind in the presence of Edward.
Oh my gosh.
Given such defiance, bared his behind in the presence of Edward.
I blow my nose at you, so-called Edward King. It kind of also reminds me of the Monty Python round of the French soldier guarding the walls, just insulting the king. The Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That's it.
Given such defiance, it may be surprising to learn that Berwick itself was defended only by a feeble wooden palisade. Edward thus led his armoured knights in an assault, brushing aside the rotted fortifications and driving the Scots into the narrow streets. In contrast to the usual framing of this event as a wicked act of brutality, the sack of Berwick actually saw Edward merely adhering to the normal code of war when encountering a defiant town, a town or settlement.
Yeah, this is very common in war. We've covered so many war videos. Like, it's pretty customary to, when an enemy army breaches a defiant stronghold or town, to usually just come to kill a lot of the people in it. I'm not saying it's cool, but like, it's pretty normal. Like, Edward isn't doing anything that no one else would do, right? We've seen it a lot in antiquity, in the modern age. Just, yeah, usually there'll just be like a lot of killings, especially if you like make them have to take the town by force. Then it's like the frustration, and it's like a punishment. So yeah, Edward isn't doing anything that I don't think anyone else would have done, you know?
That refused to surrender left itself open to sacking. Chivalric practice concerning the garrison was also within the realms of normality, as Edward offered life and limb to the 200-strong garrison in the town's castle under the command of William, the Lord of Douglas, which was accepted in exchange for Douglas's own surrender. Edward remained in the charred ruins of Berwick for around a month, improving its defences with a huge ditch some 80 feet wide by 40 feet deep. It was here that he received a firm message of defiance from the King of Scots, with John Balliol formally renouncing his homage and fealty, extorted by Edward's violent pressure. Dunbar Castle was the next English target. On paper, the castle was already in English hands, as the castle's lord, Patrick the
Dearest wife, hold the castle for me and our long paramount, King Edward. Hugs and kisses, Patrick.
the Earl of March, had sworn fealty to and was loyal to King Edward, even being present with him at Berwick. Despite this, however, it appears that March's wife, the current custodian of Dunbar, switched sides and retained the stronghold for Balliol. Unfortunately, the men of Dunbar quickly realized that though they may be able to resist a siege, they could not do so for long. Edward had sent John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey, north to capture it with a few thousand men. Dunbar's garrison asked to send word to Balliol to gauge the correct terms of surrender. The King of Scots was encamped some 10 miles to the west at Haddington, and, instead of meekly offering surrender terms, resolved to fight, sending word back to Dunbar to resist. King John sent a force to repel Surrey's army under
To
the
Dunbar Castle. Hold firm. Help is on the way, King John. Don't worry, it's not me.
command of John Comyn. It's like
Okay. So, you know, despite John having kind of being a bit of a pushover, apparently weak in some of his personality, he seems pretty resolute now all of a sudden to just be like, alright, well, we're gonna fight. We're just gonna do it. Like, he's starting to find his guts, you know, his backbone, I guess. We'll see if it works out for him, though, but, he does seem to kind of be, like, just kind of making his bed here in this side at the anti-Edward camp.
that the numbers involved were quite small. The English force under the Earl of Surrey was likely larger, but suffered the disadvantage of being trapped between the two Scottish forces within Dunbar itself and on the hill overlooking them. The Scots had arrived to combat Surrey's besieging army on the morning of the 27th of April, and they formed up on the high ground of Spottismuir near Doon Hill. Surprisingly unconcerned with the Scots' decent defensive position, Surrey mirrored the Scottish split by leaving his infantry to maintain the siege of the castle, while he attacked common Scots on the hill with his own cavalry. Approaching the Scottish position, it seemed to Comyn that
A very bold move there, apparently. It's like, okay, I don't even need my full army to take on these Scots. I don't know, part of me wants to be like a bit maybe over arrogance, but then again, I'm not sure of the capabilities of either army at this point, like how powerful they are, so, I guess we'll see.
the English were relatively few, possibly even retreating, given that their crossing of the Spot Burn broke up their lines and its steep gradient obscured their true numbers. In addition, Comyn may have been confident of a successful charge, given the impetus of charging downhill. Therefore, Comyn charged. The charge, though,
Probably not a good idea if you have a strong defensive position. Considering that the enemy is approaching you, you'd probably want to hold your defensive position, right? I don't know, I have a feeling this might not work out well, but we'll see. Maybe it might. Maybe the numbers might play a part, but I have a really bad feeling about this.
quickly devolved into a disorganized and piecemeal attack.
Oh no.
The Scots suffered from a similar effect, not realizing the steepness of the gully below them
Gosh darn it.
until they were almost on top of it. This hesitance blunted any chance of an effective charge, and when the English, quickly regaining their composure after fording the Spot Burn, countercharged, the Scots broke.
Oh boy, what a disaster. Holy crap. Yeah, probably giving up the defensive position was a bad idea. Oh boy. Alright, is the audio working? I'm sorry, I have to keep checking just to be safe.
The casualties appear to have been minimal, though the Scots were routed. A single Scottish knight, Sir Patrick Graham, was killed. Perhaps more significantly,
Only one Scot. Oh wow. Oh, what a disaster.
men were captured, including the Earls of Atholl, Menteith and Ross, with their commander John Comyn also among their numbers.
Okay.
All told, as many as 100 knights were taken by Surrey, though some managed to escape to Ettrick Forest. The victory was completed when Longshanks himself arrived the next day with the main English army. Dunbar Castle promptly surrendered, as did the castles of Stirling and Roxburgh, without resistance. Later too, Edinburgh fell after just a few days, completing the total Scottish defeat.
Dude, Scotland's getting wrecked. Holy crap. Longshanks is making great headway at the moment.
For John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey, the victory must have been sweet, having helped to secure a key castle for his king and the capture of over 100 high-status Scots. Dunbar appeared to be the seal on King Edward's...
Oh my gosh, he's basically taken all of it. boy. Yeah, Scotland had been effectively subdued. I can see that.
Conquest of Scotland, with control of South and Central Scotland quickly following. Edward celebrated the feast of St. John the Baptist in Perth, significantly receiving word from his rival king of the latter's submission. On the 10th of July, the ill-starred Balliol was brought before King Edward himself at Montrose, and literally stripped of his authority as king. The royal blazon tore from his tabard, earning his nickname Tomb Tabard. John Balliol was then unceremoniously carted off.
Okay, the 16th century depiction of Balliol's unkinging, okay, literally means empty surcoat. My goodness.
To the Tower, while Edward continued his victory parade.
Flip-flop and ramen wants it both ways.
Upon his return south via Perth, the English king had the sacred stone of destiny removed from Scone Abbey and transferred south, as well as the royal...
Edward had a special coronation chair made to house the stone that was only returned to Scotland in 19... Oh my gosh. Wow, not the Stone of Destiny. He literally yanked it from it. I was wondering earlier, I was like, they have a Stone of Destiny? That sounds pretty cool. But apparently they lost that for... until basically the 90s. Oh my gosh.
Regalia held in Edinburgh. The message was clear. Edward had not only unkinged Balliol, but had effectively unkingdomed Scotland. Now the land of the Scots would be little more than a dependent part of Edward's own kingdom. Edward hammered home this intent by holding a parliament within the husk of Berwick on August the 28th. Here he required all Scottish landowners to swear fealty not to a king of Scots, but to him, the King of England. Edward occupied Berwick for a further 3 weeks before leaving his new province in the care of his champion at Dunbar, whom he made viceroy. By September of 1296, Edward Longshanks must have felt assured.
Alright, he was Edward's lieutenant in Scotland. Okay.
Of his iron grip over his latest conquest. So much so that he apparently quipped as he handed over the seal of Scotland to Surrey that a man does good business when he rids himself of a turd.
Dude, Edward's on one. He's such a menace. Holy crap. He had like no respect for the Scots at all. Even before the conquest, he was like treating them like you know, basically as vassals, and now they straight up just are under his control, so he's like, whatever. You know, and probably not the best way to integrate a newly conquered foe, like, maybe, like, you know, I could see why there are seeds of resentment, and why there could be further conflict, because, yeah, Edward definitely isn't, he isn't even, like, pretending to show his defeated enemy any, like, grace, you know? Just straight up, you guys suck. Like, you suck, do what I say or else, you know? Which, again, I know many conquerors do treat it like that, but, it isn't the best for PR, you get me? But I guess Edward doesn't care about that.
In truth, however, not all resistance was crushed, as even then, the embers of rebellion were smouldering in the heart of a young patriot by the name of William Wallace. 1296 had proved a calamitous year for the battered Kingdom of Scotland. 4 years before, King Edward I of England had judged John Balliol as the rightful King of Scots, but in doing so, never missed an opportunity to undermine and humiliate John in the years leading to 1296. By 1295, the Scottish lords took matters into their own hands, forming a council to effectively rule on Balliol's behalf, and forging an alliance with England's enemy, the King of France. Having extracted very public oaths of fealty from the Scottish king, as well as all the leading lords during the Great Cause period, Edward felt entirely justified in coming down on the Scots with brutal ease. In 1296, the Scots had been decisively bested in the siege of Berwick and the Battle of Dunbar. Dunbar in particular had exposed Scottish inadequacies in the art of war. Their charge against the English under John...
Okay. Also, their peace made them weak because they were technologically behind because they were in such a... Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess since England definitely does seem to have a bit of, that war edge, I guess. I guess Scotland just wasn't ready for a war.
The Warren quickly devolving into a confused rout as their lines were broken by the terrain and the ordered English countercharged. Following Dunbar and King Edward's subjugation of the realm, Edward had appointed the aging Earl of Surrey as his lieutenant in Scotland. Yet, though a staunch supporter of his, King Surrey despised his new position. According to one source, the Earl ran afoul of the Scottish weather to the extent that he was actually based in the north of England. Unfortunately for the Scots, the absence of their governor did not translate into light rule. Perhaps the most hated man in the kingdom was Hugh de Cressingham, Edward's treasurer, who was based in Berwick. Unlike Surrey, Cressingham was zealous in his role of satiating Edward's perpetual need of money. Ordinary folk smarted at the confiscation of wool to be sold in Flanders to help fund their conqueror's war against the French. This anger was inflamed further by rumors that soon Edward would demand military service in his foreign war. For Edward, hammering the nobility into submission the previous year equated to subduing all folk as a matter of course. However, Edward had made a dangerous enemy in the Scottish Church, who opposed his appointment of English priests in their sphere. Such a network of educated men was the ideal conduit for communicating ideas of resistance against the hated occupiers. Robert Wishart...
Yeah, again, this is a really good example of Edward not really integrating them all that smoothly. It's really much... You know, sometimes, like, when you conquer people, you gotta kind of smooth into some of this stuff. Like, he's just straight up like, okay, you're giving me money, you're gonna give me military service, you suck, bye, like, you know what I mean? Definitely no, like, easing into it, just straight up like that. Which is definitely, as you can see, a big cause of, tension.
Bishop of Glasgow, as well as James Stewart, plotted early on to foment revolt, proving immensely successful in this, as both men were closely linked with the most famous rebel of the period, William Wallace. It was Wallace's murder of the Sheriff of Lanark that signalled a wider uprising. Yet these lords were not idle themselves, raising the banner of revolt in the southwest. Also involved in this theatre was the young Earl of Carrick, Robert Bruce.
On choosing rebellion, Robert said, "No man holds his flesh and blood in hatred, and I am no exception. I must join my own people and the nation in which I was born."
Bruce, unlike his staunchly pro-English father, threw his lot in with his own folk. However, this proved less a fire and more a whiff of smoke. The English under Robert Clifford and Henry Percy forcing their surrender at Irvine. A more successful campaign was waged in the northeast under Andrew Murray. Murray would jointly command the Scots at Stirling Bridge and had already bloodied himself at Dunbar, where he had been taken and imprisoned in Chester Castle. Murray, though, had somehow escaped back north.
Sarah Hernandez fights for our...
Murray's Scot... Scots were initially beaten back when they tried to take Castle Urquhart. However, following this setback, he enjoyed a series of successes as the campaigning season progressed into the summer. While Murray had been
good on Moray. He's actually gaining territory there.
conquering in the north, to the south, a comparative nobody raises his head, at least according to the Scottish source Forden. There is little doubt William Wallace was a remarkable man, having
Wallace was educated by his priestly uncles and may have been intended for the church at a younger age.
either an aptitude for or experience of warfare, leading small bands of men as an outlaw before his meteoric rise in 1297. The action at Lanark in May of 1297 marked Wallace's first major act on the national stage. Blind Henry's account of the day had Wallace murder the sheriff of Lanark and kill his men in revenge for the death of Marion Braidfoot, William's wife or lover. However, the Scala Chronica states that the fighting began at a court presided over by Heselrig. Wallace and his men slew the English and fired some houses. Following Lanark, Wallace joined forces with William, the Lord of Douglas, and raided Scone. This at the urging of Robert Wishart. Though they reoccupied the place, the garrison commander William de Ormsby evaded their wrath. Around this time, the aforementioned negotiated submission in the southwest was taking place. However, unlike these noble men, Wallace refused to submit and regrouped in Selkirk Forest. In August, Wallace's force headed north of the Forth, fighting the English through Perthshire and Fife.
Wow. Good on Moray, dude. Like, look at all that territory that's succeeding from the English.
Target being the castle of Dundee. By this point, Wallace and Murray were in contact and well aware that an English force was marching north to crush them. The English response to these risings was muddled. Though Clifford and Percy had marched north, they had focused on the supposed greater threat of James, Bruce, and Wishart, while Murray and Wallace had made steady gains elsewhere. Hugh de Cressingham was clearly not impressed, and in July had raised a sizable force of 300 cavalry and 10,000 infantry at Roxburgh. However, Percy and Clifford insisted on their way back south that all was well after the capitulation at Irvine. It was decided that no further action would take place until the Earl of Surrey himself arrived. Surrey, though, was hardly an inspiring presence. Already reluctant and old, he had even encouraged King Edward's attempt at replacing him, though his choice, Brian Fitzalan, pleaded poverty, claiming he was unable to oblige on account of the smaller salary he would receive. Surrey was thus stuck with the task of dealing with the Scottish menace. King Edward himself was firmly fixed on his war with France and had set sail for Flanders on the August 22nd. Meanwhile, Hugh de Cressingham awaited Surrey's arrival at Roxburgh. John de Warenne arrived in the English capital of Berwick on the 28th of July, before riding to take command of Cressingham's army and heading north. Surrey's army made...
Yeah, so Surrey's a very interesting guy from the beginning. He kind of gained the first major battlefield victory for the English. Now he's just like, I don't like the weather here. I don't want to run this place. Can I just retire? And they're just like, nope. Oh, man. Well, let's see if he can keep up his momentum from earlier, though.
It's slow progress, perhaps reflecting their commander's attitude towards the enterprise, not arriving at Stirling until the second week of September. By the 10th of September, the pieces had been set.
Okay, so let's see. The English, main body 4,500. Vanguard 1,800. Infantry 800. Longbowmen 150. Okay, so by comparison, the Scots have 6,000 infantry formed into Skiltrons, which I will talk about if he brings it up. I do kind of want to talk about that. And 100 men wide and 6 man deep. Okay, so yeah, definitely on paper the Scots army composition is not as advanced as the English as you see. The English have knights, mounted units, longbowmen. The Scots seem to be primarily an infantry-based army, so that's usually not good when your army composition is lacking in that kind of diversity. But we'll see. But I'll say on paper, yeah, the English have the better looking army and the one that could probably be more dangerous. But again, we shall see, because at the end, an army's only as good as its commander, and sorry, it does not seem to have much enthusiasm or care now, so that could actually probably work in the favor of the Scottish, who are, for the most part, maybe lacking in terms of the diversity of their army, but they definitely do have the heart and the determination on their side, at least from that, like the morale, right?
The key point of convergence for both sides was the imposing and strategically vital castle of Stirling. Stirling overshadowed both the town itself and the narrow wooden bridge that spanned the Forth. The geography of the area effectively cut the realm in two, this location proving the key to a landward invasion of the north. Stirling Bridge back then was a narrow crossing that could barely accommodate a horse and cart, meaning Surrey's men could only cross two abreast. The bridge itself connected to a causeway that led towards the Scottish position. In addition to the perilous prospect of crossing the bridge itself, Surrey's men would be hemmed into a meander of the Forth while deploying, which leaves us to wonder why he ordered the march across the bridge in the first place.
Attacking the bridge while they're crossing in such small numbers and probably like dividing and conquering would actually be much more beneficial for the Scots, yeah. Like we've seen that at times, like heck, I think probably the most famous we've seen of that example is like Napoleon in the Fifth Coalition War, where he was crossing a bridge and that's where Archduke Charles managed to break the bridge and isolate part of Napoleon's army. So this is usually a really bad idea. But again, Sorry doesn't really seem to care. Like I'm getting the impression he's pretty like whatever about everything. Oh boy. I could see how if the Scots pounce on this opportunity, this could be a great victory for them.
Surrey halted in Stirling and surveyed the situation from his perch on the battlements, while James Stewart and the Earl of Lennox made their unsuccessful attempt to negotiate another Scottish climb down. Having ordered his men to ready for the morning crossing, Surrey retired for the evening, only to rise late the next morning and find his army already crossing without his order. The vanguard was ordered back, only to be halted a second time when news reached Surrey that Stewart and Lennox had ridden back into camp, perhaps with news of a Scottish submission. These lords bore no good news, and thus Surrey made a final attempt at peace by famously sending 2 Dominican friars to the Scots commanders on the Abbey Craig. Walter of Gisborough records the immortal response from Wallace himself. "We are not here to make peace, but to do battle to defend ourselves and liberate our kingdom. Let them come on, and we shall prove this in their very beards."
After decade.
Dang. Alright, those are some fighting words, Wallace.
Despite these defiant words, both Surrey and Cressingham would be forgiven in doubting the ability of the Scots to match them with arms. To be fair to Surrey, he had personally witnessed the shambolic performance of Scottish arms at Dunbar, so must have assumed this force, under the less noble Wallace and Murray, would be easy pickings. Richard Lundy, a Scottish knight advising in the English camp, urged Surrey to allow him to ford the Forth further upstream, to outflank the enemy and allow—
Ooh, the flank. The oldest trick in the book. But Surrey's probably not going to use it. He thinks he can straight up take them in a straight up fight, right?
a safe crossing. Hugh de Cressingham disapproved of such an action, with an eye on the continuing expense of the campaign, having already sent men home at Stirling, the treasurer criticising the waste of the king's money on vain manoeuvres.
Hey, the flank is the greatest maneuver of all time. But, okay, Hugh, but, yeah, Hugh's really a money guy, huh? I'm wondering if he's motivated by avarice in any way. I know it's kind of his job to manage money, but, like, I'm wondering if he's a secret, like, he actually has, like, greed to him. But, yeah, I guess they're just gonna go for a straight-up assault.
Unfortunately for the royal army, Surrey heeded Cressingham and finally ordered the crossing of the bridge. To his credit, Cressingham was no armchair general, leading around a third of the English army across, some 2,000 men and around 100 cavalry. Surveying events on the Abbey Craig, Murray and Wallace concluded their best chance of victory was to allow the vanguard to cross and attack at the point where they were most vulnerable. The Scots, numbering around 6,000 spears, with a small complement of 400 longbowmen, were massed around half a mile away. Advancing onto Cressingham's vanguard in tightly packed schiltrons, the Scots may have given the English food for thought as they ominously veered into view at a steady, deliberate pace. Wallace and Murray riding at the forefront, their ranks solid and disciplined, their pace increasing to charging speed. The battle rapidly devolved into a slaughter.
My
The
gosh.
stationary English horse, useless, along with their packed archers, mingled—
Yeah, look at the terrain here. Like, even if they, not only is the full army not there yet, which is already bad enough, but does not seem like there could be any, like, envelopment or flanks that the cavalry could use because the narrowness of this area. So again, just we've seen this plenty of times. Armies that cross bridges and can't fully get across are prime targets for an assault, and the Scottish seized upon that opportunity.
with the infantry. The Scots enjoyed local superiority in numbers and bloodily scythed their way through the panicking English. Soon the exit to the rammed bridge was cut off, forcing many English to attempt swimming the Forth to safety. Around 300 Welshmen managed to reach safety, though the Constable of Stirling Castle, as well as much of his men, were slain. For the Scots, the greatest prize of the day came in the form of rotund and despised Hugh de Cressingham, who was unhorsed and cut down, while his men fell about him.
That's what you get for insulting the flanking maneuver. Yeah, but oh boy, yeah, what a disaster. But, like, anyone could have seen that coming, right? Like, there was too much laxing on the English side, mainly from Surrey, though. Sorry. I'm not sure. I want to say sorry, but, like, I don't know. Point is, yeah, his kind of, like, whatever, and these guys kind of putting more emphasis on, like, what money, being reckless, being too upfront. But then again, it's like Historymarche said, they're not completely wrong in underestimating the Scots, due to what they've witnessed from the past, but still, that underestimation is ultimately what led to their ruin here. So I wanted to talk about the Siltron, which is actually something I'm very familiar with. As you guys know, I'm obsessed with pikes. The pike is my favorite weapon. The pike formations are my favorite, well, yeah, formations in war, from the Macedonian phalanx, the Swiss squares, the Spanish tercios. Point is, I'm a huge lover of pikes, and the Siltron is actually an evolution of pike warfare. And probably one of the earliest instances of it coming back after, like, antiquity, when the Romans undid the pike after defeating the successors of Alexander. So it's definitely a very early example of pike coming back to the mainstream of war. And essentially, there's what I learned, the Siltron came in two forms during the Scottish War of Independence. It was a pike formation. There was the circular form, but it was noted as not being very movable. Like, it was mainly built for defense, but it could not be offensive. And I believe the Scottish modified it later to be more rectangular, so they could move and fight at the same time. Yeah, the rectangular, the circular Siltron. Yeah, the circular proved it could not move much, and so was not good for offense. But the rectangular one improved that. So overall, yeah, again, I am aware of this because, again, I'm a huge pike man. So I'm on the Scottish side right now because they're using pikes, my favorite weapon. So, yeah.
One Yorkshire knight, however, Marmaduke de Thweng, quickly realized the day was lost and led the English heavy horse towards a breakout of the envelopment. Their charge proved effective in smashing through to the bridge, but his daring escape was also the last serious resistance in the English mass. In an irony, since Cressingham had taxed and sold Scots property to help finance his royal master's war with France, the treasurer's corpse was itself flayed, pieces of his skin distributed as a prize among the victors.
Dang.
Yet Cressingham was not the only major casualty of the day, with Wallace's own co-commander Andrew Murray suffering a mortal wound, eventually dying around early November.
Oh, that's bad. Maury kind of proved to be competent, so his loss must be a huge blow to the cause, right?
The destruction of his vanguard dispirited both Surrey and the larger unengaged portion of his army. With no stomach for the fight, the Earl broke the bridge on his side of the Forth and rode hard for the relative safety of Berwick, leaving his lumbering army to tail him, while dogged by attacks from the newly reconverted Earl of Lennox and James Stewart.
Dang.
Stirling Castle itself was not provisioned for a sustained siege, and soon crowned the Scottish victory, Wallace capturing it. By November of 1297, Andrew Murray's death effectively made William Wallace the uncontested leader of Scotland. Wallace, as the surviving commander, also emerged as the legend of the period, though his newly minted reputation and position would soon be challenged by Edward Longshanks himself. The year is 1298, and in the rebellious land of Scotland, one name is on the lips of every patriot. Indeed, the name William Wallace will be forever etched into the national psyche of Scots. The loyal supporter of the deposed King John Balliol, having jointly scored a spectacular victory over the army of John de Warenne at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Wallace pushed south in October of 1297, with an army of around 3,000 men. The Scots leader forging for himself a reputation for savagery as he torched.
Okay, according to an English source, Wallace would have captured English men and women seen naked before torturing them. Oh my goodness.
And ravaged to Corbridge and Hexham, before moving his unruly men into Cumberland and then Carlisle. Carlisle proved too tough to crack without siege equipment, and hence all the Scots could accomplish was to blockade the English under Henry Percy, while they continued to fire and destroy the lands around it. Fortunately for the beleaguered English, they were not the Scots' most formidable opponent at that time, with the coming winter weather driving them back east towards Durham. This target too was foregone due to heavy snows, the Scots instead heading for Newcastle. However, Newcastle too remained untaken. The combination of foul weather and the Scots' own eagerness to return north with their plunder, driving Wallace back to his homeland by early December.
Carrying Bass is always
On the surface, little was achieved by the raid, with 3 major targets remaining in enemy hands. However, the effects are more nuanced than mere territorial gain. Wallace and his Scots plundered abundantly, significantly adding to their war chest through plunder and extortion payments. The raid also served to both boost morale and solidify Wallace's own position as the de facto leader of national resistance. The raid was just retribution for the Scots' own suffering at the hands of King Edward and his lieutenants. Perhaps common memories of the brutal sack of Berwick drove the avenging Scots on in those dying months of 1297. The Scots nobility, for its part, largely endorsed Wallace's actions, as at some point during the winter months of 1297 into 1298, the victor of Stirling Bridge was knighted by a major earl of the realm, perhaps even Robert Bruce, the future king, and victor at Bannockburn. Wallace was also elected guardian of the kingdom in the name of King John Balliol, who still lived. Scotland's champion now had official sanction and support of at least some of the nobility. He would need it, as if Stirling Bridge had achieved nothing else, it had provoked a unified drive in the English to crush the Scots in 1298. As for the English, they had not meekly hidden behind their walls in the aftermath of Stirling. Robert Bruce emerged around this time in rebellion, and Robert Clifford launched a raid of his own into Annandale in response. The battle had far from broken the resolve of the English, though the occupying forces had been largely driven out. By October 23rd, men to the number of 30,000 had been summoned. The muster of this force to center at New.
That's holy crap, that's insane. Alright, the force of 30,000 was summoned, but was slow in mustering. In reality, was smaller. Okay, so... Okay, but still, it does seem like the English have a better capacity or manpower recruitment than the Scottish right now. Scottish have like, what, 3,000? The English, even if it's not 30,000, probably still in the thousands, probably much more than the Scottish. So I'm getting the impression that the English, must have a better mustering capability for their armies, so... I mean, we'll see. Maybe the Scottish will start increasing now that more people are jumping on Wallace's side, but... Yeah, this is a bit of a cause of concern for me, because so far, the Scottish, compared to the English, don't seem to have the equipment for war. What I mean by that is, like, the earlier composition, mainly just Siltrons, mainly just infantry. They did have bowmen, but, you know, by comparison, it does seem like the armies of the English not only have, like, knights, bowmen, infantry, but just seem like they can muster more, and that they seem to have more at their disposal. Maybe they're just more wealthy, or maybe their war machine is just that much better, but the moment they all start locking in and throwing all things down, I'm a bit worried at how the Scottish are going to fare, you know, once Edward himself joins, you get me? But we'll see.
Newcastle by the December 6th. Assembling any kind of force at such short notice was no easy feat. In the event, some 18,500 advanced north earlier on in 1298, relieving the castles at Berwick and Roxburgh. At this point, operations were paused on the orders of King Edward Longshanks himself, still present in Flanders. This may have been foolish, given the delay gave the Scots precious time to consolidate and brace for the inevitable.
It's true. You don't want to give the enemy, the Scots, too much breathing room, right? Like, going as fast as you can and taking them out. Giving them breathing room actually favors them more, so probably not the best move for Edward there, but we'll see.
Response. However, Stirling must have heavily influenced this decision, the loss persuading Edward to personally oversee the reconquest of what he considered a rebellious vassal folk. At this point, it's helpful to circle back on the character and recent times of Edward. He had not presided over the loss at Stirling, instead overseeing English efforts against their other old enemy, the French, in Flanders. Edward too had much to distract him from matters further north. Indeed, Edward had partially acted against the Scots to begin in 1296, due to their open alliance with the French. The French King Philip, having confiscated Edward's lands in Gascony, proved another formidable opponent to vex the English monarch. Edward also faced problems with some of his own great nobles, specifically around this time led by the Earls of Norfolk and Hereford. Opposition to the king centered around the main complaints of excessive extractions in the form of prizes and taxation, as well as over military service in Edward's wars. While agreeing in principle to rendering military service, Norfolk famously refused at Salisbury in February of 1297, as Edward himself would not lead him on that occasion. Edward angrily declared, "By God, Sir Earl, either go or hang," which was smoothly parried with Norfolk's own response, "By the same oath, O King, I shall neither go nor hang." On the matter of taxation, the opposition...
Yeah, that seems to be a big problem with Edward, huh? It's constantly in this state of war, so he needs to... Obviously, wars are expensive, so he's constantly seems to be taxing and demanding a lot from, apparently not only the Scottish, but his own people, so that creates not only war weariness, but, like, frustration, and, like, hey, we don't want to keep doing this, dude. Like, you know, we don't want to keep being in a state of war, so... Yeah, Edwards does seem to have those kind of problems I'm noticing, huh? He's very much a dominant personality from what I'm gaining. He's like, okay, give me this, I'm the king, give me this, and, you know, but, like, he doesn't seem to have, like, a very winning personality to some people, very much not one for soft courtesy, I guess, which is creating some issues for him.
In the form of Norfolk and Hereford, even went so far as to block collection of taxes in the Exchequer itself on the very day Edward himself embarked for Flanders. The prospect for a unified front against the Scots thus looked bleak at best by the fall of 1297. Edward's foray in Flanders achieved little. His grand coalition against the French proved a non-starter, the King of the Romans failing to support him, and the Flemish themselves were flaky in their allegiance, thus prompting Edward to move from Bruges to Ghent. Here, Edward had to stamp his authority on the recalcitrant citizens to fully control the place. It's probable that Edward received news of events in Scotland by early October. Certainly, on the 9th of the month, he had agreed a 2-month truce with Philip, though he would remain in the area for a further 6 months. In England, the prince's government came to an agreement with the opposition, with the confirmation of the charters of Magna Carta and of the Forest. In addition, future exactions in the form of levies and prizes had to come through common assent of the realm. Edward officially okayed the agreement on the 5th of November.
Wow.
With a year-long truce agreed with the French on 31st of January, Edward finally returned to England by March. The king returned with a steely resolve to smash the Scots into renewed submission.
Okay, so things are kind of working out for Edward down south, you know, managing to make peace with the French and then kind of get that little issue resolved. So now he has more time to focus on the Scots, which I think is an awful position for the Scottish to be in. Holy crap. Yeah, now that Edward has his hands free for the most part, enough to deal with them personally, this is going to be the real test for William Wallace now.
With his move of the governmental HQ to York, where it would stay for 6 years. Surrey's hastily assembled force was largely dismissed during the April and May months, Edward deciding to muster a better quality force to march on the Scots. Edward called upon just 2,000 English foot from the counties of Cheshire and Lancashire respectively, with the vast majority being drawn from Wales. Edward mustering in all 10,500 foot from here. Total crossbow.
Okay, it's estimated, given the Welsh population at the time, number around 200,000, roughly around half the male fighting population participated in the campaign. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is terrifying for the Scottish right now. Edward is sparing no expense. He wants to crush them, like, decisively. He probably wants to crush the Scottish so bad that they can't even, like, ever recover to have another rebellion, right? So this is actually really frightening. I'm actually wondering if Wallace can hang with Edward, because Edward definitely seems like he's about to, like, go all in, so I'm a bit worried for the Scottish at the moment.
10,500 foot from here. Total crossbowmen numbered around 500, with the cavalry numbering an impressive 2,200 of both paid and feudal men. The leadership roll call was also incomparable to Stirling. 11 earls, the Bishop of Durham, and no less than 115 bannerets accompanied their king. Edward entered York on the May 26th and made his intentions for Scotland plain by making a pilgrimage to the shrine of John of Beverley, a figure especially associated with battle. With the banner of John, he processed to Durham.
Oh boy, I'm like super worried right now.
Reaching it by 12th of June, and also taking the banner of Cuthbert, a saint famed as a defender of the English against the Scots. These holy banners were the very same who had driven the Northerners to victory in 1138 against David I's invasion. As for the Scots, the swelling army of William Wallace was likely mostly based in the vicinity of Selkirk Forest throughout the spring and earlier weeks of summer. At Falkirk, the Scots would field a total of 9,500 men, 8,000 spears, and 1,500 archers. Falkirk, the Scots would field a total of 9,500 men.
Yeah, again, like, I was kind of right about the talent, the recruiting pool. Yeah, the English recruiting is definitely comes across a lot more professional. You know, Edward is calling all these guys. He's able to muster up a much larger host. Meanwhile, the Scottish, by comparison, is just anyone who's flocking to William Wallace. But still, like, the numbers, the English recruiting seems to be much better, at least in terms of a numerical sense, you know what I mean? But yeah, well, numbers aren't everything. We've seen plenty of times numbers aren't everything, but it is still a cause of concern for me right now. Oh boy.
8,000 spears, and 1,500 archers. Such a force was substantial enough to cause logistical headaches even for experienced commanders. It's likely as the date of the battle loomed, Wallace thus moved his army to the Torwood for ease of supply, and also to block the English route to Stirling. The Royal Army finally amassed at Roxburgh, the infantry marching from Carlisle, the whole host with Edward at its head, advancing north through a land already picked clean of resources by the Scots. This scorched earth policy was effective, with delays in supplies from sea causing rumblings in the invading force.
Scorched earth is always a good approach to have. I mean, granted, I know it comes at a cost of your own land, and that it is costly, but I've never seen an army counter the scorched earth. All the greatest armies in the world have fallen victim to when the scorched earth comes, you know, from Mehmed the Conqueror to Napoleon. So is it a desperate move? Sure, yes, but it's usually a great way of slowing down an enemy army, weakening them, causing issues. So this probably was a really good move on William Wallace's part to like kind of start depriving them of natural resources, because time, you know, to slow them down and cause some issues among Edward's host.
Edward thus halted at Kirkliston near Edinburgh in July, increasingly angry at the slow supply situation. During this period of frustration, Edward sent the Bishop of Durham out to ravage 3 castles. The initial assault on Durlton was beaten back, but after stiff words of encouragement from Edward, the task was completed. Durlton was taken after supplies arrived to reinvigorate Durham's force, and the other 2 were fired after their abandonment. This minor success was offset by trouble in the main English camp. Not all the supplies arrived at once. A large quantity of wine came before any significant load of food, and the larger Welsh contingent liberally indulged themselves with predictable results. Drunkenness combined with hunger devolved into a mass brawl that threatened the integrity of the royal army.
Oh boy.
The Welsh killing some priests who tried to calm the situation.
Oh my gosh.
Prompting English men-at-arms to intervene. All in all, some 80 Welshmen were slain, and the group withdrew apart from the army. This incident likely did not involve all the Welsh in Edward's army, but was damaging enough. It was at this low point that some good news finally came in. The Earls of Dunbar and Angus presented the king with a spy who informed him that the Scots were around 18 miles west, waiting to pounce on the retreating English and raid their camp. With renewed vigour, Edward led his army west, camping at Linlithgow on the 21st of July. Tensions were clearly high, as the royal host was ordered to remain arrayed for battle throughout the night. In a final misfortune, Edward himself was wounded, but not by attacking Scots, but by his own horse, whom a careless squire had not secured properly. Nonetheless, the men mistook the commotion for an attack, panic quickly spreading before Edward himself painfully restored order. Mounting his steed, he proceeded towards Falkirk.
Yeah, things are not going well for old Eddie boy, huh? Like, between all this dissent and the issues and the drunken brawls and now him getting hurt, like, if you're a big believer in omens, this is kind of setting up a really bad vibe. Like, the omens are not good right now. So, yeah, like, I'm kind of really looking forward to seeing how Wallace handles Edward. Because, again, Edward and his army is beyond impressive, but William Wallace is showing that, like, battle-hardened tenacity. So, this is gonna be a real... I'm really looking forward to this battle and seeing who comes out on top.
Long before the dawn. Unlike Stirling Bridge, the exact site of battle is not definitively known. Since no precise landmarks distinguished it, there are candidates known.
Okay, alright. Yeah, the Scots don't have the numerical superiority, but we'll see.
Since no precise landmarks distinguished it, there are candidates north and south of Falkirk itself. Wallace had positioned his men on high ground to the south of Callendar Wood. His 8,000 spearmen formed into 4 tightly packed circular schiltrons. Tactically,
The face paint. Yeah, I know the famous image, right? Like from Braveheart, and like the Scotch are usually like what the blue face paint. I don't know how accurate that is. I'm not a fan of. I'm not really all that familiar with Scottish history. This is kind of my first foray into it, really. But I mean, granted, we have kind of covered it like with the English Civil War, but like this is the first time like we're kind of giving the Scottish like their own main emphasis. So. But that's usually a famous depiction of the Scottish, which I don't know if it's true or not, but I don't know. If Historymarche is making fun of it, maybe not, but we'll see.
This was a sound move, the Scottish commander likely basing his decision on his knowledge of the English use of heavy cavalry. Since the schiltrons were not anchored to any natural feature, their circular form would enable opposition to a charge from all directions. Guarding the gaps between the schiltrons were Wallace's 1,500 bowmen, though their numbers paled in comparison to Edward's 5,500 longbowmen. The confluence of the Glen and West Quarter burns created a boggy obstacle to any direct assault, funneling potential assaults towards the flanks. Guarding those flanks towards the rear, to presumably oppose the charge of Edward's horse, was about 500 cavalry under the command of James, the High Steward. Having settled on this stance, Wallace famously shouted to his stoutly arrayed Scots, "I have brought you to the ring. Hop if you can." Initially hesitant to immediately attack, Edward allowed his heavy cavalry to probe the Scots with an unsupported attack. The infantry were yet to fully deploy to the field, still advancing from Linlithgow. Charging in 4 battles, the Earls of Lincoln and Hereford, as well as Roger Bigod, the Earl Marshal of England, led the vanguard, with Surrey's battle in support, while the right flank was led by the Battle of Anthony Beck, the Bishop of Durham, as well as King Edward's battle. King Edward himself may have not directly engaged in the thick of the fighting, but would certainly have ridden with an elite bodyguard of chosen knights. Initially, the charge was halted by the marshy terrain that had been unmarked. However, the battles quickly veered around and reorganized to attack the flanks instead. Lincoln's battle, outclassing and outnumbering the Scots cavalry on his wing, made quick work of them, killing or driving them from the field. Some Scots may have dismounted and escaped to the schiltrons to continue the fight on foot, but what is sure is that the Scots cavalry was eliminated as a threat from the field. As for the archers positioned between the schiltrons, they too fell victim to the ferocious charge of the English horse. Having wheeled around the marshy terrain in the centre and approached the Scots army on the flanks.
Oh boy, that's not good. Yeah, the loss of, granted, the cavalry force of the Scots was incredibly meager, so that's not a surprise, though. Losing of the longbowmen is not a good thing, considering the schiltrons are kind of, at least the circular ones, to my knowledge, did not have offensive capabilities. They were mainly just defensive, so this works good for them, but they can be picked off by Edward's long-range units, so them losing their bowmen instead of like maybe hiding them inside the schiltrons is a really bad thing for the Scots. But aside from that, this defensive, as we all know, the pike is the best counter to heavy cavalry. So, yeah, this is pretty telling, right?
Riding to the rear and smashing into their formations, the archers stood little chance. The approach of the knights, concealed by their own comrades, braced in the schiltrons. With the flight and fall of the Scots cavalry and archers, the royal battles refocused their wrath on the immobile but stalwart Scottish schiltrons. This final challenge, however, proved a fight too far for the cavalry alone. Edward's cavalry circled the bristling formation of spearmen, attempting to probe and smash their way through the gaps, to no avail. The Scots' main infantry force thus remained unbroken for now. However, the English infantry were edging slowly towards engagement, and King Edward now deployed a deadly counter.
Yep.
His long
Exactly, that's what I was gonna get at. I'm a big Total War Rome 2 player. I love having phalanxes, and I usually, a large part of my army, it does have a lot of phalanx units. But, I always make sure to get plenty of skirmishers, like slingers and archers, as support, because just having the phalanx isn't enough. Enemy AI will often use their skirmishers and long-range units to weaken a phalanx. The phalanx is incredibly vulnerable to skirmishers, slingers, and archers. That's why you need, like, you know, long-range units as well as support. And considering that they've just lost their, you know, their own bowmen, the Siltrons are great. If Edward was only attacking with his cavalry and infantry, this would be fine. But the fact that he has longbowmen, which we know are OP, we watched the 100 Years' War. So English longbowmen are no joke. The fact that he has 5,000 of them is more than enough to weaken the Siltrons. Siltrons and, you know, essentially grind them down and weaken them. So, oh boy, yeah, this can't end well.
Omen. These volleys of arrows and bolts shredded the forward ranks of Wallace's formations, with many of Edward's men even taken up and throwing stones to increase the pressure. Slow and methodical volleys of the deadly missiles thus eroded away the Scots rather than smashed through them, as the cavalry had wanted. One source describes the Scots falling like blossoms in an orchard when the fruit has ripened. Inevitably, the ranks of the Scots thinned and gaps began to appear, thus providing the cavalry the chance to force a path.
What a disaster, holy crap. And this goes to show you the importance of army composition, right? And having, more than one type of unit. I mean, granted, I know that I'm assuming that the Scottish don't have as much resources as Edward. That's not entirely all their fault. I don't mean to say that. It's just, it goes to show you the advantage, is what I'm getting at, that the English have with their much greater army number and composition between the bowmen, the cavalry, and the infantry, having a good balance of each. Meanwhile, the Scottish could only really muster a primarily infantry-based force. So this is a good example of army composition and the advantages of having more diversity in the units between long-range infantry and cavalry. Advantage that the English have, but unfortunately the Scottish numbers don't possess. So yeah. Yeah, like when I'm playing Total War Rome 2, certain types of defenses, I'll have a crapload of phalanxes, but they'll be grind down due to just the late enemy missiles. So I always have to invest a lot in getting rid of enemy missile units first with my own, or else my phalanxes will be incredibly weak and be grind down like this, you know?
To cutting down the spearmen close up. With this breakthrough, the Scotch Chilterns were compromised. However, they still easily outnumbered the English cavalry. Though our major source, Walter of Gisborough, makes no overt mention of the infantry moving in to complete the victory, this is highly likely. Many hundreds were killed making for the relative safety of the woods. Included among those who did escape the disaster were William Wallace himself, along with a few of his inner circle. Wallace retreated north and made sure to gut Stirling as he did so, only leaving the house of the Dominican friars intact, which King Edward took as his headquarters. The defeat at Falkirk irreparably damaged the prestige of William Wallace. His brief authority and title of Guardian had been reliant on his success, and now he resigned his post, retreating to his Vega role before his startling ascendancy a few months before. Wallace did serve his king as a diplomat visiting the French court in 1299. He also may have visited Rome around the turn of the century, returning to Scotland by 1303. As for Edward and his victorious host, despite heavy losses and the discrediting of Wallace, Falkirk was not a crushing end to Scots' resistance. Wallace would remain a painful symbol for English doubt throughout the period, a living example of how Edward's armies could be defeated. Wallace had been humbled, but the Scots patriot was still alive, and as the mighty English monarch aged inevitably to his own end, a new champion would rise to challenge and expel the hated English.
Yeah, that battle, man, was a good example of like what I mentioned earlier with the whole army composition and stuff, but yeah, very much down the mood, like William Wallace kind of losing his prestige due to that loss. But still, it appears that the Scots can live to fight another day, so that's pretty good in this very bleak instance.
The year of 1298 had witnessed the humbling of William Wallace, less than a year after his initial triumph at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. However, the defeat of Wallace's Chilterns at Falkirk was far from decisive, with even Wallace himself escaping the slaughter. Yet even as the battered kingdom of Scots entered its fourth year of war with England, another hero had already made moves to position himself as a great champion of his people. The famed future Scots king Robert the Bruce was born in 1274 during the years of peace and prosperity under King Alexander III. Robert was the son of Robert de Bruce, the 6th Lord of Annandale, who was himself the son of Robert the Competitor, later rival of John Balliol, for the then vacant throne of Scots. In 1292, the Bruces had seemingly lost their chance of kingship, with Edward Longshanks's election of John as king. Robert and his family naturally sided with Edward as he heaped pressure on the Scots to support him financially and militarily in his wars as Scotland's overlord. In the event, John's short reign proved unsuccessful, the nobles in his kingdom seizing control by 1295 and forming an alliance with France, King Edward's greatest enemy. 1296 set the seal on Balliol's failure as a monarch, Edward himself having John ritually stripped of the crown and occupying the kingdom after a brief struggle. Documents ominously began to refer to the land of Scotland as opposed to a kingdom, and now the throne was effectively vacant with Balliol's exile. It may have been around this time that Robert began to seriously reignite his own family's ambitions for the throne. As the summer of 1297 approached, the Bruces remained rooted in their English allegiance. Having heard of the defection of Sir William Douglas to Wallace's cause, King Edward sent word to Carlisle for the elder Bruce to send his son north to raise the men of Annandale and seize Douglas's castle. Robert dutifully obliged, though en route he had a change of heart. At Douglas Castle, the young Bruce gathered his men about him and said, "No man holds his flesh and blood in hatred, and I am no exception. I must join my own people and the nation in which I was born. Choose then whether you go with me or return to your homes." Many of the knights present chose the latter, feeling a stronger influence in their pledges to King Edward and that their lord, the elder Bruce, also still held to his alliance and thus departed. Robert, however, marched northeast through his own domain of Carrick, recruiting as he went, and later joined the steward and Bishop Wishart at Irvine. Irvine proved a dismal false start for Bruce's own intentions. As a formidable force of armoured knights under Percy and Clifford approached, dissension in the overall resistance crumbled the rebel resolve. Unlike Wallace and Andrew de Moray, both fighting their own campaigns elsewhere, James Stewart, Robert Wishart, and others considered the Balliol claim dead, given John's unkinging the year before. Facing a powerful force disunited with their own army of mostly footmen, cracked the resolve of the rebels at Irvine. On 9th of July 1297, the Bruce, along with the other leaders, agreed to surrender to King Edward's peace, though Robert did not hand over his infant daughter as hostage, remaining in rebellion and deprived of his lands. As for the elder Bruce, he was deprived of his governorship of Carlisle and retired to his English lands until his death in 1304. During Wallace's short-lived wave of success, it was Robert who dubbed him a knight in his base of Selkirk Forest and supported his being made guardian of Scotland by his own and a collective agreement of all the lords, bishops, and leaders present. Following Falkirk, the Bruce himself was made joint guardian of the realm with his great rival John Comyn of Badenoch, also known as the Red Comyn. The Comyn family had been staunchly loyal to the Balliol claim, proving a colossal obstacle to any Bruce claim, holding extensive lands and power beyond the Tay. Falkirk was a stinging defeat, but hardly a signal of full conquest. Edward simply did not have the numbers to fully occupy the land, his control concentrated in the southeast. In Scotland, the civil government continued, though the fragile alliance soon disintegrated, Bruce resigning his post in 1300. Though Edward could not prevent the loss of Stirling Castle in 1299, he continued to campaign during his last years, the English army invading the southwest from Carlisle in 1300. Both Edward and his
just the momentum, my goodness.
heir Edward of Carnarvon invading in 1301, and Edward also marching as far north as Kinloss Abbey in 1303. On the 22nd of April 1304, Edward initiated the siege of Stirling Castle. In March of the same year, John Comyn and around 100 Scots nobles formally swore homage and fealty to Edward. The surrender of the kingdom's leading men and the loss of the key castle of Stirling was not the limit of an independent Scotland's ill fortune, as in August of 1305, the victor of Stirling Bridge himself was captured, eventually suffering the horrific sentence of hanging, drawing, and quartering.
You know, I've heard legends about William Wallace's death and how brutal and incredibly, drawn out it was. And, yeah, they really try to make an example out of that poor guy. I'm like, dude, that death was awful. Just all of it, every death we can give you, we're gonna give you all at once, holy crap. Yeah, they really want to make an example out of him, right, who was once, the kind of the main head of the Scottish resistance, and now just kind of, subjecting him to just a very grisly end. And yeah, the overall situation is just so awful. The momentum that Edward is having is seemingly unstoppable. And it seems like it's going to be a repeat of the earlier conquest. Robert the Bruce is kind of like the last hope, right?
Wallace's head was set above London Bridge, his body butchered and displayed in Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. Meanwhile, a shred of hope for a united front against the English emerged in the summer of 1305. Clandestine negotiations between the Red Comyn and Bruce produced a shaky agreement premised on the understanding that one should receive the estates of the other in exchange for one of them becoming king. At the time, Edward was seriously ill in England, and in the event would never set foot in Scotland again, which perhaps reinforced the urgency of an agreement. Edward's recovery may have caused Comyn to rethink his position. The whole matter was brutally concluded at the infamous meeting at Greyfriars Monastery on February 10th, 1306. Bruce accused Comyn of treachery, causing the two men to come to blows despite being on sacred ground. Near the high altar, the confrontation ended with Robert stabbing his rival to death, though it was possible a retainer actually finished Comyn off.
Holy crap. Oh boy. You know, I kind of did figure there was going to be issues with these two. They seem to have like a rivalry, as mentioned, especially with, you know, trying to prevent the Bruce family from kind of being the king. So I kind of figured, yeah, like these two seemed like, yeah, I was just thinking like, even if they had worked together, I was having a hard time kind of imagining them working in a long-term capacity, because it does seem like there's tension between the two, and capability or potential for like backstabbing, betrayal. Though it happened now, obviously, but yeah, maybe it might be for the best for Robert, though, like, not having to watch his back with a rival, so maybe this might help him in the long run, though. Obviously, murdering in a holy place probably, I don't imagine it's a good look, but, you know, oh well.
The gravity of the murder was huge. Robert had killed one of the most powerful men in Scotland in a...
Yeah, I would imagine that's probably like... Yeah, I'd imagine like back then, especially when like, the world was a bit more religious, especially at this time, right? The medieval era. I'd imagine murdering someone at a church, like I said, it's not a good PR move. Yeah.
Church, a highly sacrilegious act. An act which would have severe consequences later on.
Oh gosh, oh no.
Now all in on his path to the crown, Robert captured Dumfries Castle. The Bruce moved quickly, riding to the bishops William Lamberton and Robert Wishart, who, though supportive, likely viewed Bruce's action to seize the throne untimely, as their greatest threat in Edward Longshanks still lived and would inevitably move to destroy them. The bishop fully threw his support behind him by formally absolving him of Comyn's murder. Bruce's endorsement by the church may on the surface appear odd, given such an egregious act. However, Scotland's leading clergymen had always proved a solid bulwark of resistance to what they perceived as inevitable English dominion over them, if Edward's designs for a Wales North succeeded.
Yeah, as we kind of covered earlier with what Edward was doing with the church, makes sense that the church of the Scots would just be incredibly like, you know what, sure, you committed a super sacrilegious act, but like, better than Edward, so we're cool, you know?
On 25th of March 1306, Robert the Bruce was crowned King Robert I of Scotland in Scone. The ailing Edward Longshanks was furious with the news and sent his lieutenant Aymer de Valence.
You imagine Edward's like, oh, again? It's like, why can't I get Scotland under control? Oh man. Poor Eddie boy.
Earl of Pembroke, as well as his son Edward, to punish the errant Bruce. Prince Edward infamously marched under the dragon banner, flown to indicate that the usual rules of chivalry were suspended, and so Robert could expect no mercy.
Oh no.
Valence quickly established his camp at Perth by June, with his army drawn from men of the northern counties, making up a sizable 3,000 men. As might be expected, Pembroke's host was eagerly supplemented by Comyn's supporters. King Robert, though, was not idle, and moved with around 4,500 men to confront Valence in Perth on June 18th.
Very bold.
There demanding the Earl came out and do battle. Unfortunately for him, it's likely King Robert had not heard news of Edward's raising of the dragon banner, or his declaration of him as an outlaw, significantly changing the context of any encounter. Pembroke answered by denying the offer of battle, claiming it was too late in the day, and that they would fight on the morrow.
Is this a stalling tactic?
The Bruce knew Pembroke as an honourable man, and accepted, withdrawing his own force into the woods near Methven.
Yeah, but the dragon banner, bro. I've never heard of that. Apparently, the dragon banner means, okay, we're doing away with chivalry, we're just gonna do whatever it takes now. So all the rules are gone now. This is, you know, it's all up for grabs now. So... Oh, that's bad. So I guess he can lie now? Is that what we're getting at? He's like, well, I don't have to abide by chivalry, the dragon's up, so, you know, I can lie to you now. I've never heard of that before. That's kind of funny. Like, I wonder how many times it was used in, like, and if this is just an exclusively thing in England. I don't know, but that sounds really interesting.
Trusting to the rules of engagement, and not posting scouts. That same evening...
Oh, bro. Yeah, Bruce seems a little naive at the moment, or maybe not naive, but he's in the dark of what's going on. He doesn't have the full picture, which is super bad, considering that they're going there to, like, try to get rid of him. So... Oh, man.
Pembroke attacked, his force containing large numbers of archers and cavalry. The Scots, who were largely dispersed, unarmed and unarmored,
oh my gosh,
proved unequal to Pembroke's men.
Oh my gosh.
The royal army fought ferociously to barely enable their king to flee. Robert himself was said to have personally unhorsed Pembroke during the melee, but was in turn himself unhorsed 3 times before making his escape. Most of Robert's army were not so lucky. Of the 4,500 men who fought at Methven, some 4,000 were either slain or taken captive.
Oh my gosh, he basically lost his army. Dude, this is bad. How is Robert gonna, like, survive this? Like, I've already been worried about the Scottish manpower the entire time. Like, their armies are not huge, or seemingly as well equipped as the English, so it feels like every man counts, you know, in a way more. So the fact that they've lost multiple armies is kind of worrying me right now with the Scottish. Like, how is Bruce gonna recover from this disaster? Can he recover?
This heavy defeat was only compounded with another hard blow struck by the MacDougall clan, common loyalists, at the Battle of Dalray, further reducing Robert's following.
Oh my gosh.
This opening few months of Robert's reign proved the nadir of his fortunes. News soon reached him that Prince Edward had seized Kildrummie Castle, commanded by his brother Neil. Neil held out for a time. This action initially enabled the Bruce's womenfolk to escape north to Tain. However, the Earl of Ross, a common sympathizer, sent his men to capture them, sending them south into English captivity.
What a disaster this opening part is. Everything is turning against Robert right now.
Throughout the winter, he waited off the mainland, possibly on the island of Arran. Such a catastrophic reversal would have broken any ordinary man, yet in true Alfredian style, Robert planned his comeback. Given his small
How are you gonna come back? Like, how are you gonna muster up an army at this point and, like, strike back? They even have hostages now, so... Yeah, like, the situation looks as bleak and as dire as it could possibly be. So how can he come back from this? Like, all the cards are on the English side right now. I don't know. It almost seems impossible that he could come back from this.
He couldn't hope to win a conventional war against the English. Dalray also proved he had troubles enough, with domestic enemies too. Therefore, Bruce decided to take on the latter first. At Loch Ryan, Alexander and Thomas Bruce were both defeated by the men of Dungal MacDougall and later executed. With the foray into Galloway cut brutally short, the Bruce finally met with success in his own invasion of Annandale, where he could count on strong local support. Evading a local English garrison, Bruce scored his first minor victory at Turnberry, defeating the men of Henry de Percy in the outskirts of the castle, eventually forcing Percy's withdrawal. Aymer de Valence soon moved to counter him, likely aware of the king's small numbers and hoping to pin down and crush him. Robert's capture would hopefully snuff out Scottish resistance for good. The Bruce, though, also knew this, and so wisely chose carefully where to confront his enemy.
Yeah, he's in an awfully precarious situation. Robert also just lost two other relatives, so holy crap. This is like, he has like a tiny army probably now, and he essentially has to, like, his situation seems so precarious. One major defeat now could honestly just crush him, so he's gonna have to pull up like some Hannibal Barca-esque genius and like manage to win without suffering any major losses, if that's even possible for him at the moment.
In April of 1307, this approach proved fruitful. Valence received intelligence that the Bruce was based at the head of Glentrool, and perhaps wanting to repeat his tactic of surprise, moved in for the kill. The area was basically a narrow track with a steep slope overlooking it, and down which Pembroke sent his cavalry. Robert sent his own men up the slope, having them loosen rocks and boulders down onto the English, inflicting heavy casualties.
Oh, dang.
This barrage was followed by deadly volleys from the Bruce's archers, and maybe even a general charge, which caused Pembroke's general withdrawal.
Very not. Okay, that kind of doesn't remind me of Hannibal's attack on the lake that he did to the Roman army. Alright, that's pretty good, I guess, you know? Not I guess, but like, that was a really good move. Make a narrow passage for the enemy so they can't use their numerical superiority. Attack from the sides. Okay, Robert, I'm liking this new approach. You're definitely fighting smarter. Well, and harder too, but definitely smarter at the same time. Okay, Robert, alright, I see you, Robert.
Glentrool boosted the morale of the Bruce's followers, yet did not diminish Pembroke's resolve as he pursued the king to Loudon Hill. Up to this point, Robert had fought small guerrilla-type engagements, but now chose to fight a potentially ruinous pitched battle, despite being heavily outnumbered and with arguably inferior men. The Bruce had next to no cavalry, while the Earl of Pembroke's 3,000 troops were almost exclusively horse.
Okay, but that could work though. The Siltrons are effective against horse. So if Robert the Bruce is using that, or are we gonna move on to the rectangular Siltrons now, which can actually attack at the same time? If so, then this is good. The only thing is, if the English have any bowmen, I would be worried for. But if not, I could see this. This is a pretty big gamble on Robert's part. A pitched battle. This is an incredibly, like, big gamble, but I guess we'll see if it pays off.
However, this number and value imbalance was lessened by Robert's clever use of terrain. He deployed his men on elevated land, flanked by boggy ground, with some woods guarding his rear and to the right of the advancing English. These natural features served the purpose of funneling the English assault into a single predictable direction.
Oh, wow.
Robert formed his infantry into schiltrons, well suited to facing Valence's probable cavalry charges. Robert also had his men dig trenches. The result was nothing short of a medieval car crash in which men, horse, and cold steel meshed into a bloody and muddled mess.
Holy crap.
The battle, though, was still hard fought, with King Robert himself, along with his brother Edward and the Black Douglas, leading his men in melee. After several hours, the schiltrons continued to hold, and with no possibility of flanking the stubborn Scots, Pembroke ordered a withdrawal.
Okay, Robert is locking in. Holy crap. Look at the way he took all those L's before and he was like, let me just lock in and change my entire approach. He's now fighting so much more smarter. He's using terrain. He's picking with utmost carefulness, using geography to his advantage with natural defenses. Also, the trenches, great move on his part. Really dictating how do you say, he's taking the initiative now and using everything at his disposal to make up for his inferior numbers by creating situations that the English can't use their overwhelming manpower and, negating any of their advantages with cavalry. So, again, Robert's locking in. Holy crap.
King Robert's victory at Loudon Hill was an unambiguous defeat for the English, inflicting hundreds of casualties and, more importantly, confirming Robert the Bruce as the nexus of Scots resistance to English domination. The Bruce's cause was only enhanced soon after by the death of his greatest threat, King Edward Longshanks, on July 7th, which saw the crown of England and Longshanks' ambitions pass on to his untested heir, Edward of Carnarvon.
Yeah, so the Longshanks already proved to be quite the bane of the Scottish existence. His death his death alongside the rise of Robert the Bruce's victories is like the perfect turning point, right? Now the Scottish are like, oh, not only is Edward, who has already proven to best us multiple times, not only is he gone, but now Robert is proving to be like amazing on the battlefield. So this is like the perfect turning of the tide for people to rally behind Robert, right? Yeah, his newfound success on the battlefield happening at the same time around as Edward's death is like the perfect storm for his stock to rise. And I'm not sure how Edward's successor, his son, is gonna do. He's untested. I don't want to rule him out completely, but he's gonna have to really fill in some big shoes, after his father's passing.
Loudon Hill arguably marked the true turning point of the First War of Scottish Independence, though the Scots would have to grind on for several more years before reducing the English presence in their land down to a handful of castles. Though by 1307, King Robert was already set on the glorious road to his greatest triumph at Bannockburn. The unexpected death of King Alexander III ended the long period of peace and prosperity in Scotland. And with his only heir, his sickly granddaughter Margaret, dying 4 years later, the Scottish throne was left with no clear successor. In an attempt to avoid a civil war between no less than 13 claimants to the throne, Edward Longshanks was asked to arbitrate. Realising that the possibility of controlling Scotland, as he did Wales and Ireland, was within his grasp, the English king ultimately announced in favour of John Balliol, whom he anticipated would be a reliable vassal. However, by 1295, Edward's demands for men and money to support the war with France exasperated the Scottish nobility, who persuaded Balliol to rebel and enter a defence pact with France. Outraged, Edward raised an army and invaded, starting the First War of Scottish Independence. As one of the strongest and ablest of kings to ever rule England, Edward crushed the Scots at Dunbar. John Balliol surrendered his kingdom before being dispatched to the Tower of London. Although a well-garrisoned force was left to guard the conquered lands, disturbances broke out soon after when William Wallace fanned the flames of revolt across Scotland after he defeated an English force at Stirling Bridge. His victory resulted in his elevation to the guardianship of the realm, and preparations began for what was to follow, a confrontation with Edward. Determined to hammer the Scots into submission, the English king marched north, having previously signed a peace treaty with France. He mustered a powerful army and decisively defeated Wallace at Falkirk. With the throne still vacant in 1306, Robert the Bruce made a bid for the crown by killing his main rival, John Comyn III, in the Greyfriars Church, claiming the throne of Scotland as the great-great-grandson of David I. With the support from a section of the Scottish Church and nobility, he was crowned at Scone. But his rebellion got off to a bad start with a shattering defeat at Methven, where most of his loyal followers died or were captured and executed. Then at Dalry, Robert's retreating force was intercepted and nearly wiped out. With his position collapsing, he escaped to the tiny isle of Rathlin, where he set about reorganizing his resources. Worse followed. Robert's sisters, his daughter and his wife Elizabeth, were captured and delivered into the hands of Edward I, and his brother Neil was executed at Berwick. In early 1307, he ventured back toward the mainland with a handful of followers. Meanwhile, his two younger brothers sailed for Galloway, intending to harass English communications between Carlisle and Ayr. But once they landed in Loch Ryan, they were ambushed, captured, and later executed. Robert, on the other hand, had success against the English at Glen Trool, and more significantly at Loudon Hill, which saw his following and his territorial gains grow significantly.
Yeah, this comeback is really so cool to see because, as we just covered, dude lost these super big battles in the beginning, lost his family, relatives captured, siblings killed, and the fact that he took all of that and got back to winning is actually incredibly impressive and showing of his resolve. That's actually incredibly baller. Like, respect to the Bruce.
Scottish fortunes took a turn for the better when the 68-year-old King Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, died on July 7th, 1307. His frivolous son and successor, Edward II, lacked his father's military and political skill, and his reliance on favourites earned him the contempt from his leading magnates, which distracted him from the situation in Scotland. This allowed Robert valuable time to deal with those Scottish nobles who opposed his rule, most notably his arch-rival John Comyn, 3rd Earl of Buchan, whose rich earldom was left at his mercy after he defeated the Earl at Inverurie. Robert took Aberdeen in the summer of 1308, making his hold on the northeast unassailable, and other nobles soon joined him, enabling him to turn his attention to driving the English from his kingdom. Over the coming years, one by one English castles fell, and Robert gave those Scottish nobles...
My goodness, yeah, the momentum shift. Like what we covered earlier, when Edward would ever show up here, he would just storm through and take everything. Now the reverse is finally happening, as Robert is just... He's unstoppable right now. His momentum is growing. He really did lock in after those L's he took in the beginning and was like, I just need to, like, be amazing now. And he is. Wow. It also helps that Longshanks is dead, right? So that's definitely a worthy adversary he doesn't have to worry about anymore. So yeah.
Who had not yet come to his banner, a year to swear fealty to him, or they would lose rights to their lands. By early spring of 1314, only the great strongholds of Bothwell and Stirling remained in English hands. Bothwell was isolated and presented no immediate threat, So Robert entrusted his brother Edward Bruce with the siege of Stirling. Philip Mowbray, the beleaguered governor, realized that the fall of Stirling was but a matter of time, and agreed with Edward Bruce that if he was not relieved by June 24th, he would surrender the castle. King Robert was displeased with his brother's chivalrous gesture towards Mowbray, understanding that this deadline would spur the English into action. Now, only a pitched battle would prevent the castle from being relieved, and Robert knew that this could undo all that he had achieved so far. Meanwhile, King Edward II patched up relations with some of his magnates, and was now on his way north to muster an army at Berwick, under pressure to relieve Stirling by June 24th.
Yeah, Edward, I feel like, is the major key to this. We know Robert is beyond competent. It's Edward that's kind of the how do you say, the main factor of how this can all end. If he's anywhere, he needs to be like, I'm not sure, like I said, I know he's untested, I don't know this guy, I don't know his reign, but it does seem kind of bad. He needs to be as good as his dad, or at least near good to his dad to pull off this. I don't have a feeling that he will be, though. I don't know, I could be completely wrong, but yeah, I feel like he could be the weak link that probably leads to the Scottish winning, right? Well, we'll see.
Money had been raised with a loan from the Pope, and a stream of men converged on Berwick, along with an immense amount of supplies and equipment that were brought by land and sea. As the army marched towards Stirling, all provisions had to be stockpiled and transported, as the Scots would make sure to scorch the land and leave nothing of use for the advancing English. King Robert faced an army more than twice the size of his own, and he positioned his forces a few kilometers south of Stirling, where he waited for Edward. Robert divided his 7,000 infantry into 4 divisions of schiltrons, strong defensive squares of men with pikes, arraying them along the Falkirk Road that goes through the New Park Forest to Stirling. On the morning of June 23rd, Sir James Keith, commander of the 600 light Scottish horsemen, went on patrol to observe the arrival of the English army. Seeing 3,000 horsemen, knights and men-at-arms, their weapons and armour glistening in the sun, was a daunting sight. Behind them, 13,000 infantry and a contingent of Welsh archers exited the Torwood, descending onto the plain south of the Bannockburn stream. The English formation stretched for several kilometres, and Hereford's heavy cavalry in the vanguard started making their way down the steep embankment of the considerable Bannockburn stream, and after climbing up onto the road, they sighted the Scottish footmen, apparently retreating back into the woods. Meanwhile, on the English far right, Baron of Clifford rushed along a path, hidden from view, with his armoured mounted contingent to cut off the Scottish line of retreat towards Stirling Castle. Back on the Bannockburn stream, Hereford's nephew, Sir Henry de Bohun, spotted a figure riding out in front of the Scottish infantry. It was King Robert himself commanding his troops. Henry could not resist. He saw this as a chance to end the war by striking down the Scottish king and achieve personal glory. He lowered his helmet, steered his fully armoured charger towards the king, and pointed his lance straight at him. On his light grey palfrey, unequipped for mounted combat, Robert had every reason to seek safety with his troops. But he set his horse towards the challenger, who bore down full tilt.
Okay, that's pretty brave, Robert, but maybe a little dangerous? Like, oh my gosh.
As they closed in, Bruce quickly swerved his nimble horse aside to avoid the lance, stood up in his stirrups and smashed through Henry's helmet, his axe breaking on impact. The English knight was dead before he hit the ground.
Wow. Alright, never mind. I'm sorry, Robert. I'm sorry I even doubted you for a second. It's just, I was a bit worried there. But, oh my gosh. That's probably a big morale boost, right? Like, holy crap, look at how awesome our king is. Like, that's probably actually a good morale boost for the Scots right now.
Meanwhile, Hereford spurred his men forward along the road, confident that the Scots wouldn't dare confront the armoured horsemen on open ground. He wanted to catch the footmen before they retreated to the safety of the woods. But the Scots weren't retreating.
Oh boy.
Robert had ordered large pits covered with branches to be dug on both sides of the road, and he waited for the enemy to come to him. Before the English could form up, Robert's Skiltrons lowered their spears and moved up in a tightly packed phalanx-like formation.
I love pikes, dude. The pike is my favorite thing. Like, I love how the pike came back. Like, after the Romans defeated the successor kingdoms of Alexander, like, basically the Romans kind of removed the pike from mainstream warfare, because after that it was, you know, hardly anyone used it. But I love that around the medieval and Renaissance era, thousands of years after the Romans kind of took out the pike by conquering the successor kingdoms, I just love that it came back. I love that humanity just remembered, hey, you know, the pike was actually really cool. Like, it was actually a really powerful weapon, and then the pike came back and ended up becoming the king of the battlefield, at least until guns and the muskets took over, you know, the bayonet. But yeah, again, I'm just happy that the pike came back, because it is my favorite weapon, and I love these formations. It's just like humanity remembered, hey, pikes are awesome, you know. let's bring him back, you know. Yeah, so I'm happy about this. And again, just Robert, bro, this guy is using the terrain, geography, improving upon the Siltron by making them, instead of the circular, you know, ones, he made them like the square ones that can actually attack. You know, just this guy improved everything. He really is great.
Hereford's cavalry was immediately met with heavy losses as they ran into a wall of Scottish spears. As the rest of his mounted contingent tried to form up, they experienced considerable difficulties with the pit traps. Gloucester circled back with his mounted men, attempting to cross further upstream. Seeing the maneuver, Edward Bruce immediately moved to protect his brother.
Yeah, they're trying to go for a flank. The oldest trick in the book. But can it work? Probably not.
Brother's flank. Unsure about the extent of the pit traps, and with Edward Bruce's troops approaching, the English fell back. Meanwhile, on the Scottish left flank, Randolph noticed Clifford's contingent almost too late. He quickly sprang into action, angry with himself that he almost allowed the enemy to encircle his position. He led his men out of the woods and towards the onrushing English. The Scots formed shoulder to shoulder as an impenetrable wall of spears.
So
Clifford's
cool.
cavalry circled around their formation, launching attack after attack without success. And, in their frustration at not breaking through the Skiltron, the knights hurled spears, darts, and maces, even their swords, at Randolph's men, in a vain attempt to maim enemy troops. Douglas, meanwhile, left the woods with his spearmen and slowly advanced. This lifted the pressure on...
Yeah, the Skiltrons, bro. Again, the pike is the perfect counter to heavy cavalry. Like, you think the English would have learned this, right? After they gained that big defeat over William Wallace, that, hey, maybe we need, like, longbowmen. Like, the way to counter them is to have, missile superiority. You think they would have learned that lesson, huh? After like the biggest L that they handed to the Scots, but apparently not. They're still trying to rely primarily on their horse units, which I think is not obviously not good. The pike is the natural counter to it. So yeah, they probably could have used far more longbowmen that would have done them much more good than the cavalry advantage.
Randolph as some of the English cavalry wheeled about to meet the incoming enemy. Randolph seized the opportunity and assumed the offensive, charging right through the English ranks. With their formation broken and with fresh Scottish infantrymen approaching, the English heavy cavalry dispersed. This brought the fighting of June the 23rd to an end. Although the English losses weren't heavy and they still retained their 2-to-1 numerical superiority, their morale took a big hit after the two clashes. With the day drawing to a close, King Edward's troops needed a place to encamp and the horses needed to be watered. He decided to move all of the cavalry and about a half of the infantry into a marshy area across the Bannockburn, while the remaining infantry and the baggage train would encamp south of the stream. Meanwhile, Robert Bruce gathered his officers for a council of war. Despite the successes of the day, harsh past experiences taught him to avoid pitched battles against heavy cavalry, and he considered withdrawing deeper into the rugged Scottish wilderness, where it would be too hard for the English to follow. But as the talks went on, a Scottish knight in English service defected and swore fealty to Robert Bruce. He informed the king that the English are demoralized and disorganized, pledging his life that if Bruce attacked in the morning, he would have victory. Robert turned to his officers saying, "Shall we fight or not?" In one voice, they boldly answered for battle.
Okay, this is it, huh? This is the gamble. That will apparently decide the entire course of the war. Oh boy. A pitched battle. Again, they've been, Robert the Bruce has been very selective when it comes to pitched battles. Can he take them? For sure, but obviously there's the risk. But if he's gonna go for it, he's gonna go for it, I guess.
On the morning of June 24th, among the English a mood of caution replaced the earlier presumption of easy victory. King Edward began deploying his cavalry between the deep ravine of the Pell Stream and a thick wooded area in the south, ordering archers and infantry to form behind them. King Robert the Bruce then gave the momentous order to advance across the open field against the mighty English army, more than twice the strength than his own, and with far superior weapons. The seemingly suicidal plan of advancing with infantry against heavy cavalry was only possible because of the innovative way in which Robert trained his schiltrons to move forward in echelon formation. He hoped that the English would still view his formations as defensive and wouldn't appreciate just how vital their mobility was for his plan of attack. As the Scots moved slowly to keep their cohesion, Robert sent his archers forward to divert as much attention from his spearmen as possible. And the ruse worked, as English bowmen responded by shooting at Scottish archers instead of the infantry formations.
Okay, smart. Yeah, the bowmen, I feel like, are the real problem. Like, the Skiltrons are going to be incredibly, like, useless against the bowmen, as we covered with the defeat of William Wallace. So, to distract them and, you know, cover them, I think is really important, because no doubt that, they're going to be so focused on the Scottish bowmen and while underestimating the maneuverability of these new Skiltrons. So this is going to lead to them using their movement to no doubt deliver a crushing momentous blow, right?
As the English were still forming their lines, Their commanders argued over who should lead the cavalry attack. Refusing to wrangle for too long, Gloucester charged headlong across the open space between the two armies, followed by Clifford and many other prominent knights. As they crashed into Edward Bruce's Skiltron, Gloucester and his comrades were instantly killed by the wall of spears raised to meet them.
Holy crap.
Most of the cavalry contingent was annihilated in a matter of minutes. The Scottish bristling hedge of steel-tipped pikes now pushed forward.
The pike! Yes! Like, I just love the pike. Oh, it's my favorite weapon. Just... Guys, you're not gonna get through a pike wall. Guys, come on, you're gonna know this, right? You're not gonna break it through brute force.
A succession of spirited attacks were mounted by the English, but they weren't able to break the Scottish formation. Observers said that as the cavalry met the Skiltrons, the horses disappeared from sight like men plunging in the sea. Slowly but surely, Edward Bruce's formation reached Bannockburn and anchored its position to the stream, allowing other Skiltrons to push forward. Robert now planned to trap the English between the two streams. For hours the fighting continued as the Scottish spearmen held their ground against bruising rushes of horsemen. Physical demands on individual spearmen must have been enormous.
Yeah, I bet.
The disciplined Scots showed great unity against the attacks of the English cavalry as they edged their way.
This is incredible. Like, it seems like the English army isn't fully, like, on the same page, because on the other side of the stream, there's this entire contingent that's just chilling. So, like, they're gonna push them and trap them between the street. Oh my gosh, this is just... If he pulls this off... masterful. A great show of discipline and wow. This is awesome, dude.
Further into the narrowing pocket between the Bannockburn and Pell Stream. So far, the English archers, who could have potentially broken up the Scottish formations, weren't utilized properly.
Yeah, those would have been the key to doing way more damage.
Someone finally ordered them to shoot at the Skiltrons.
Oh no.
However, with Scottish ranks being so narrow, the arrows now flew harmlessly over them.
Oh wow.
The bowmen were then ordered to shoot past the cavalry, directly at the spearmen. This also failed, as English horsemen towered over the Scottish footmen, in effect shielding them from arrow volleys and finding themselves in the line of fire.
Oh my gosh, friendly fire. Oh my gosh, what a complete... Oh, boy. Yeah, they realized far too late about the advantage of their longbowmen, their archers, and, yeah, it's too late now. They're just getting too close. They're about to... The trap seems like it's about to be complete.
Nevertheless, arrow volleys continued as English archers gradually moved across the Pell Stream to get a better angle. Seeing this, Robert ordered his light cavalry under Mareschal Keith to try and disperse them, recognizing the danger archers could pose for his spearmen. Meanwhile, the Scots closed the pocket between Pell Stream and Bannockburn, effectively trapping the English between the deep ravines of the two streams. After crossing the Pell Stream himself, Keith's light cavalry galloped with their lances levelled towards the English archers. The bowmen were overrun, and those who weren't killed fled across the stream. Keith continued to patrol up and down the Pell Stream to prevent any further flanking attempts by archers. As the hard-fought battle reached its...
And just like that, the archers are just a non-factor, which means that the Skiltrons can just finish the job. Masterful. Masterful from the Bruce.
Savage attrition stage, the push of the exhausted Scots slowed, and Robert now played his full hand by sending his own two Skiltrons forward, aware that he could not afford a stalemate. Some filled the gaps in Douglas's spear lines, while others leaned with all their strength against the backs and shoulders of men whose knees were buckling after hours of fighting. The English finally began giving more ground. With the outcome now virtually certain to go against them, English leaders were determined to get their king to safety, as the Scottish spearmen were close about him on the front line. The withdrawal of
Holy crap. The Scottish army lost 500 infantry. The English army lost 4,000 infantry. Okay, killed or drowned in the Forth River after the battle, okay. And 1,000 cavalry. Many prominent nobles and knights fell. This is why you don't attack pike units directly, guys. Like, you gotta find a way to weaken them before. Even the Romans knew that, guys. Like, before the Romans encountered the phalanx, how did the Romans defeat the phalanx? They would usually soften them up with, like, you know, a lot of, you know, what's things called? Their javelins. And then, you know, kind of create, or lead them to rough terrain, or find a way to get around them. Actually, getting around them does not seem possible here because these are squares, so they actually could defend on all sides. But point is, you know what I mean. Yeah, they just kept trying to, like, brute force straight up assault in the front, and that's where pikes work the best. So obviously, they did not know their pike history, because if they did, they would have realized, yeah, this was dumb, and they just threw a lot of people at the enemy. Into essentially a meat grinder. And you have to give it to the pikemen. Like, look at the amount of ground they covered from here all the way, all the miles that they pushed, right? They must have pushed just to push them here in a unending momentum charge while fighting. Like, that's gonna take a toll. That has to be exhausting work. Dude, Robert the Bruce, his comeback was legendary. From, like, the beginning of his reign where everything went against him to just this, this is one of the best comebacks ever.
500 knights to protect the king not only guaranteed defeat, but triggered an undisciplined flight by many others. The defeat of the English opened up the north of England to Scottish raids and allowed the Scottish invasion of Ireland. In exchange for the captured nobles, Edward II released Robert's wife Elizabeth and his sisters Christina and Mary, as well as his daughter Marjorie, ending their 8-year imprisonment in England.
Wow.
The victory at Bannockburn secured Scotland's independence with the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton in 1328. The English crown recognised the full independence of the Kingdom of Scotland and acknowledged Robert the Bruce, his heirs and successors, as the rightful rulers.
If you stayed around this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment as a sacrifice to our videos for...
Alright. Good on Robert the Bruce, bro. That was amazing. The way he managed to snatch victory from such a bleak and awful situation, you know, I was like, there's no way he can come back from this. Like, it was just too bleak. And then, just the way he locked in and just unlocked, like, his full military potential. I don't know how else to put it. It's just, that was amazing. Honestly, especially that last battle gave me chills. Just everything working out perfectly for the Scots. And at the end, everything that the English did to try to subjugate and rule over them backfiring horribly. The real tie turner definitely was the rise of Robert the Bruce, but also the death of Edward Longshanks, who, if he had been around longer, I feel like Edward Longshanks probably could have halted maybe Robert's momentum. So it's actually a kind of a blessing he died for the Scots. You know what I mean? That his untested son, Edward II, took the throne. So yeah, that honestly was really cool. I'm very satiated at the moment because, I was really interested in this whole event, and I'm glad to have finally learned more about it. And if I ever look at Braveheart as a movie reaction, I'll at least know the actual context of what's going on. So yeah, I'm gonna end the video right here. Overall, another terrific series, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.